Welcome to Michael Pott's Formula One. Everything Formula One, but from a photographer's point of view. Round 2, Saudi Arabia. For this race review of the 2022 Saudi Arabia Grand Prix, I'd like to show you a few of the photographs that I took during the course of the race weekend, hopefully add a little bit of colour and something different from your average race review vlog. It was only a few months ago that we were here for the very first Saudi Arabia Grand Prix. Then it was a race against time to see if everything would be ready. Championship was delicately poised. Last two races of the season, Max was leading Lewis. Coming into the qualifying session, Lewis had set the best time, but it looked like Max was going to take it on the final run. Coming into the final corner, he went a bit wide and crashed his Red Bull, giving Lewis his 103rd pole position. During the race, Max managed to take the lead after a few restarts, only for Lewis to get it back in very, very controversial circumstances. To be honest, I don't really know what happened there, and I don't think anyone else does. It was a frosty podium. Max stormed off just after the anthems to drink his champagne by himself. Fast forward a few months, and things have changed quite a lot. The facilities are a lot more finished, but there's still an air of building site around parts of the track. The first photograph I'd like to show you is from the 50th floor of the Shangri-La Hotel. The hotel was currently under construction when I took this shot. You can see the race circuit weaving its way along the Jeddah Corniche. Myself and about 10 other photographers were here waiting for FP2 to start. It took us a few minutes to realize that things had been delayed. No one knew why. After a few minutes, we started getting text messages from friends back home asking if we were okay. What we were not aware of was there had been a missile attack by Yemenis rebels against an Aramco oil refinery facility. There was a huge blaze engulfing the city. From our vantage point, we couldn't see anything. We were just looking at the track. Nothing was happening. One of the guys had the cunning idea to try and go around the side of the building. Because it was a construction site, all of the rooms were open. So we went from our vantage point around the corner, and there in front of us was this huge blaze. The fire and the smoke column towered over the city, and it was visible from the track. This has prompted Formula One to delay the start to make sure everything was safe for the drivers and the fans. The attack sent a chill through the paddock. I mean, for us, we were on the 50th floor and very soon realized that we could be a target of a similar attack. But after the session, the drivers called a meeting, and there was a very real possibility that the race wouldn't go ahead. There were long discussions between the organizers, the promoters, the government, the drivers, the team bosses, the sponsors. After about 4 hours, everyone agreed to go racing the next day. Formula One faces some very difficult questions about whether it's right to be racing in Saudi Arabia. Personally, I think coming to the kingdom has helped open things up. There are a lot of human rights questions that need to be answered. The track itself is exceptionally dangerous. The Corniche circuit is the fastest street circuit on the calendar. There have been a number of high-speed, very dangerous crashes, and I think it makes the drivers a little bit hesitant about wanting to race there again. However, the kingdom does have a multi-year, very lucrative contract with Formula One, and Aramco, the Saudi Arabia oil company, is one of the major sponsors of Formula One, as well as a sponsor of the Aston Martin team. Collar signs in front of the Corniche Mosque. One of the downsides of this track is there's a lot of concrete blocks and barriers. Quite often the drivers are basically driving down a tunnel, and you don't really get a sense of where you are, the beauty around you, the sea, the lagoon. But this is one of the few spots where you can see a bit of an iconic building and a race car in the same sort of a shot. This is turn 23. The cars are coming through here incredibly quickly. I had to shoot this shot at about 4,000th of a second. You can still see a little bit of blurring in the tires, but pretty much everything is frozen. I'm shooting into the setting sun, which kind of gives me a lot of very nice shadows and makes the shot very, very interesting. The next shot is again the same mosque, but this time from turn 3. So we're actually shooting over turn 23, where I was just a few minutes ago. And this is taken in an evening session. This is Max Verstappen turning into turn 3. You can see the mosque has been lit up by blue lights. It looks really dramatic, it looks really beautiful. I love the juxtaposition of having the cars and the mosque in the same shot. The next photograph is taken in exactly the same position, but from above. This was taken during qualifying, and you can already see that Max is a few centimeters closer to the edge than he was on the previous shot. I took this from the hospitality suites that straddles the track, and I think it's kind of unique in Formula One, where it's one of the only places where you can, as a spectator, watch Formula One cars racing below you. It's a stunning lounge full of very nice areas to relax and unwind and listen to music. You only occasionally have to deal with the odd sweaty photographer coming along and trying to get a shot. This is Carlos Sainz during free practice 3. I like this shot because it shows how close we get to the cars. This is on his push lap, so a lap that he's going particularly fast, and you can see how close he is to the barrier. And I was able to shoot with quite a wide angle lens. This is a 14mm, and even at that wide angle, I'm struggling to get all of the car in the shot at the same time. This is actually a really nice time of day to shoot. There's a lot of shadow, the light is very warm. Sergio Perez going down the start-finish straight. Again, this is taken from FP2, from the Shangri-La Tower. It was incredibly windy up there. There were gusts of buffeting wind, and we were all kind of like huddling in corners trying to get a shot. It was further complicated because the Shangri-La has quite high balconies. They're glass balconies, but they're fairly high. So we were all shooting on our tippy toes, and again, in the buffeting wind, it made that shot particularly hard to pull off. I like how you can see the pit crews on the side. Carlos Sainz from the Shangri-La Tower. This is from the track that goes next to the lagoon. One of the positives about shooting a night race is you have a lot of opportunity to experiment with long exposures. This image is taken at about 1/8 of a second. We got a bit of blue light from the lights shining over the lagoon. We have some of the lights coming in from the overhead lamps. These long exposure panning shots really kind of show the speed and the pace of Formula One cars. It kind of gives you a sense of movement and a sense of what it's like looking at the cars in real life. Lewis Hamilton in turn 2. This is another long exposure panning shot. Here the shutter was open for about 1/4 of a second. This allowed the lights to blur and there'd be a lot of movement in the car. It really looks like it's pumping around the corner. Lewis has had a very bad start to this season. These new regs have caught Mercedes out a little bit. The car is porpoising an awful lot, and in the race he actually finished 10th. At the end of the race he went on the radio to his race engineer asking if there was actually a point for finishing 10th, which to a lot of people sound like a bit of a sarcastic comment. But Lewis has only finished 10th or below 10 times. When there wasn't a crash or a mechanical issue that was out of his control. 10 times in 290 races is phenomenal. The last time he finished 10th was in 2012 in South Korea. This was his 180th race for Mercedes, which made him the driver who's raced more races for any single team. He's just overtook Michael Schumacher at Ferrari. I think his poor performance actually highlights quite an astonishing career. Zhou Guanyu after qualifying. Zhou got knocked out quite early on in qualifying and was waiting at the media pin. And also just a really bit of nice light on his face, and I managed to get this shot that looked quite cool. He's having a bit of a difficult start to his Formula One career, but that's not unexpected. A lot of drivers find it hard to adjust. I think we should start judging him later in the year once he's had time to settle in. Sergio Perez celebrating his first pole position. I must admit, this one came a bit out of the blue for me. I wasn't expecting Perez to get the pole position. Ferrari were particularly fast, and it looked like it was going to be one of those two drivers who were going to claim it. And indeed, when the drivers got out of the cars, you could see a sense of disappointment in the Ferrari drivers' faces. Even if the Red Bull had been the fastest car, you'd kind of expect Max to take pole position because he is phenomenal over a single lap. Checo is an incredible driver, but he's never really been known for his single lap place. That's kind of why this is his first pole position after racing for so many years. But Checo is definitely much more comfortable in this year's Red Bull than he was in the previous one. He's starting to be able to show his skill and his talent. A lot of people thought that he was just going to be a second to Max Verstappen, and Max Verstappen was going to do exactly what he did to all his other teammates and completely blitz them and destroy their careers. Checo, it actually looks like, has been able to hold his own. Got two shots here, kind of contrasting slightly different emotions. The first is him fist pumping and being very excited. And then there's this sense of relief after achieving something which must have been an ambition of his for such a long time. Charles Leclerc preparing for the start of the race. He's wearing his fireproof balaclava. You can see there's a small hole for his drinking tube. There's also a microphone and headphones inside the balaclava. Formula One has increased the safety standards on a lot of their protective gear since Romain Grosjean's horrific accident in Bahrain 2 years ago. The race suits have to be able to withstand temperatures of up to 800 degrees Celsius for about 12 seconds, which is phenomenal. But it doesn't give you much time to get out of the car, considering all of the belts and harnesses and straps and buckles and protective casings that they have to get through. The next shot was taken a few minutes later of Charles getting inside his car. I really like this shot because I managed to get quite low down and shoot up the car, so it kind of exaggerates the position of the driver and it just makes it look a bit more dynamic. This is just before the start of the race. There's like a buzz in the air. There's a real sort of electricity in the atmosphere. There's so much anticipation about what's about to happen. Each driver has their own unique way of getting into their car. Charles always enters from the left-hand side. Max and Lewis always from the right. See if you can ever spot them doing something different. the AlphaTauri of Pierre Gasly on the grid. One of the unique privileges of my job is to be able to walk the Formula One grid before the start of the race. I don't think there's anywhere in the world quite like it. It's the most hectic, insane 15 minutes you experience. There's so much going on, so many people, so many things to take photographs of, that you're just bouncing from one thing to another, trying to capture something beautiful, trying to capture something memorable, a moment, a personality. And I quite like this one. This one's the back of Pierre Gasly's car. Kind of shows a little bit of the symmetry of the new vehicles. It also shows the chaos around it, the engineers working. The start of the race. The start here is quite unique. It's a fairly short rundown to the first corner. We are shooting from part of this hospitality unit that I mentioned before, but it's a part that's still under construction. So we have to access it by climbing up some scaffolding. There's no air conditioning. It's stiflingly hot in there. I managed to do 2 laps before I had to leave, but it's a very, very cool view of the track. It's always a great sensation having these cars hurtling towards you. If you look closely, you can see the teams are quite closely grouped together. Both Ferraris are not far apart, the McLarens are in the same sort of space, etc., etc. The only difference is the gap between George and Lewis. That visual kind of illustrates how much more Lewis is struggling with the current Mercedes compared to his teammate. The dueling Pink Panthers. For the second race in a row, Alpine were in full pink. This race made you think back to the days of Sergio Perez and Esteban Ocon when they were racing for Force India. There was a time when the two of them were almost magnetically attracted to each other, continuously crashing into each other, knocking each other off the racetrack. Again in this race, Alonso and Ocon were at it. There were some aggressive overtakes attempted into turn 1, some over-ambitious blocking maneuvers, all in all very exciting. The restart. Nicholas Latifi crashed, triggering a safety car, which completely upended the race for Sergio Perez. Having led up until that point, Sergio Perez stopped the previous lap to put on fresh tyres. Unfortunately, his opponents were able to stop under the safety car, which allows them a much shorter pit stop, and they were able to get ahead of him on track. This pushed Sergio down to 4th place. I was particularly nervous about any crashes or safety cars. Foolishly, I booked my return flight quite early after the end of the race, and had there been a stoppage for any length of time, I would have had to leave the race before the end to go and make my flight. It was a precarious position to be in, and one that I'm sure I'll never repeat ever again. So every time I saw a car getting anywhere near a wall or slowing down, my heart was stopping. Luckily, there were a few incidents, but all of them got resolved under virtual safety car or safety car, and the race wasn't stopped. So I made my flight by the skin of my teeth, thanks to a local taxi driver who knew all of the back routes. Max Verstappen commiserating Charles Leclerc at the end of the race. These two drivers had an absolute ding-dong battle, overtaking each other on numerous occasions, racing really, really hard. It's great to see they can compete so tenaciously on track, but still remain respectful and friendly at the end of the race. It's quite a contrast to where Max and Lewis's relationship had got to at the end of last year. I'm not saying that if we're in the same position and we're 2 races from the end, Max and Charles are still at it, that they'll be this cordial towards each other. Max Verstappen celebrating with champagne. Only it's Saudi Arabia, so it's not champagne, it's rosewater. It still sparkles and fizzes like the real thing, and I'm sure it tastes as sweet. As I was racing back to the media center to grab my stuff to head off to the airport, I did go past the media pen, and there was a very dejected Sergio Perez contemplating how the race could have turned out differently had it not been for that safety car. The fireworks in the background are quite a contradiction to the sort of sadness and sorrow you see in his face. Carlos Sainz at the end of the race. Carlos finished 3rd, and while the other 2 drivers were doing their interviews, he went over to the big screen and started watching the battle between Max and Charles. And I guess, like us, he wasn't able to see how the battle unfolded. What happens with us is if we want to shoot the podium, you have to gather in a specific spot, maybe 5 or 10 laps before the end. Quite often we have no idea how the race is unfolded if something happens in those last few minutes. There's been more than one race where I've gone to shoot the podium and gone, oh gosh, I wasn't expecting him. And this was one of those cases. When I left the track, Charles was in the lead. And I was quite surprised to get there and see Max taking the win. Thank you for watching the Saudi Arabia Grand Prix race review. I hope it gave you something a little bit different to the other race reviews that are out there. And if you liked it, give me a follow. There'll be more to come. Thank you.